And down the bottom of the Roswell Daily Record for July 9, 1947, you'll see this harassed rancher who located saucer. Sorry, he told about it. We're going to see how that was used in a few minutes. So the story goes around the nation. Most newspapers carried we found the flying saucer, and it was a weather balloon stories in the same edition. It was only in the western part of the nation that you had separate days of the story. Most city newspapers carried both on the same day, and the press accepted the story, and the very next day, the Air Force started having these weather balloon demonstrations all over the country. This not only to kill Roswell or demonstrate what Roswell was, but to also try to kill the UFO, the burgeoning UFO problem, because it was 2 weeks prior to this that the first flying saucers, as they were called, started appearing in en masse across the nation. They were front page news almost every day of the week across the nation. So the Air Force had a problem not only to kill Roswell, but to try to kill UFOs as well. Here is a picture from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram dated July 11, and they're showing one of the weather balloon demonstrations in Fort Worth that the Air Force was putting on to convince a nation that the UFOs were nothing more than what you see. Here's a photo from the January 1948 New Mexico magazine. It says, one of the experiments there in Alamogordo, where they also had a demonstration, is probably responsible for newspaper stories last summer about flying discs and flying saucers. And so they're just putting on a demonstration, 2 rubber weather balloons, the tinfoil radar target or kite, and there your UFO and Roswell situation was answered. The architects of this cover-up, because that's what it was, are these gentlemen: Colonel William Blanchard, commanding officer of the Roswell base, which at the time in 1947 was the first Strategic Air Command, or SAC, base in the country. The SAC was the primary deterrent to the Soviet Union, and at the time was the only atomic bomb group for any country in the world. His boss, General Roger Ramey, from the mighty 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Secretary of Defense Robert P. Patterson, SAC Commander George Kenney, and the Deputy Commander Clements McMullen. This fellow over here is Eddie Rickenbacker, a famous World War II fighter pilot who had nothing to do with this. And he's saying, how do I get out of this photo? The ultimate architect of the Roswell cover-up is this gentleman. Any ideas? General Hoyt S. Vandenberg. At the time, he was Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army Air Forces. But in September of 1948, the Air Force became a separate branch of the Armed Services, and he became its first Chief of Staff. There's your architect of the Roswell cover-up, working out of Washington, D.C., the Pentagon. Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer sent out to the base by Colonel Blanchard. The story died for 30 years. It went off the radar scope, died for 30 years. Jesse Marcel in the late 1970s is dying from emphysema. He's a ham radio operator. He comes forward with some of his ham compatriots, and in 1978, Stanton Friedman, who spoke here yesterday, was in, I think it was either New Orleans or, I think it was New Orleans, Louisiana, and they said he gave a TV interview. And the interviewer says, well, you know, there's a fella here you ought to talk to. He says he actually handled pieces of a flying saucer, and it was Jesse Marcel. So Stanton interviewed Jesse by phone, and thus began the civilian investigation of the Roswell incident after 30 years of the case being off the radar scope. Here's a front gate of Roswell, the Roswell base in the mid-50s. Here's an overhead view taken. This is actually a 1947 shot. You can see the B-29 bombers lined up on the tarmac. And it's, like I said, it's the first SAC base, always on the ready to take off in case of time of war. So the 509th, they were hand-picked. It was our elite unit in all of the military, and to assume that they couldn't tell a rubber weather balloon and a tinfoil radar target from a ship from another planet, I don't know about you, but it strains my believability. And there you see a artist rendition of Jesse Marcel kneeling and at the debris field site. We'll get to the sites in a minute, but he's looking at the strange debris. The rancher Mac Brazel is pointing out to some other location where more of the stuff is. And the gentleman in the background is supposed to be Sheridan Cavett, the counterintelligence officer from the Roswell base who accompanied Marcel and Brazel out to the site. Okay. Now, Stan Friedman interviews Marcel in 1978. In 2 years, the first Roswell book comes out. William Moore and Charles Berlitz are listed on the cover, but Stan did the yeoman's work on the investigation, and I think the book is based on interviews of about 60 witnesses. I know when I read the book in 1980, I was interested in UFOs like a lot of people, but when I read the Roswell incident, for me, that was it. The rest of the UFO phenomenon assumed much less importance to me, and I was really hooked on the crashes because for me, you're dealing with potential artifacts. Okay, so that's 1980. It's 11 years before the next Roswell book comes out. 11 years, 1991, by Kevin Randall and Don Schmitt. And it's my opinion that it was this book that really jump-started the reinvestigation of the Roswell case. This book was based on, it was over 100 witnesses, perhaps as close to 200 witnesses were interviewed for this book. And the movie Roswell, there's a Showtime movie. Did anybody see the Showtime movie Roswell? It's based on this book. It's based on this book. At this point, I had joined the Roswell investigation team of Randall and Schmitt. I became involved when I tried to locate the archaeologists who were allegedly involved in the the discovery of the ship. And they were supposedly from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. So I said, let me have a crack at it. They hadn't done much with the archaeologist connection, so I went down to Penn, spent many Saturdays there, and that's how I became involved in the investigation. That's 1991. Here it is, 2009, 18 years later. I never would have dreamed that I'd still be on the Roswell case. And I'm way beyond the archaeologists now, but that's how I got involved and associated with Randall and Schmitt. Well, after the Roswell movie, in 1994, they're starting, a groundswell is starting for the Air Force to come clean.